You already know this scene, even if you've never read it. A man comes down a burning mountain with 2 stone tablets in his arms. He sees a crowd worshipping a golden statue. His face goes dark, and he lifts the tablets over his head and shatters them on the rocks. We file that moment away as a temper tantrum. The prophet lost it. He got angry, he broke the stone, end of scene. But stop and look at what he actually threw on the ground. Those 2 tablets were, according to the text, the only object in the entire Bible that God physically wrote with his own hand. Not dictated to a prophet, not spoken through a burning bush, written by the finger of God into stone, and Moses smashed it. Then, 40 days later, he climbed back up that mountain and made a second set. But this time everything was different. This time God did not cut the stone. Moses did. He carved the tablets himself by hand and carried them back up to be written on again. So here are the questions this video is going to answer. What was actually carved into those tablets word for word? Why did the same commandments have to be given twice in 2 completely different ways? And here's the part almost nobody is told. When you read the second giving closely, in the same chapter, there's a real case that the second tablets did not say exactly what the first ones did. To answer that, we have to read the verses everyone skips past. Let's get into it. Let's start where the tablets start, because the setup matters more than most retellings admit. Israel has just come out of Egypt. They cross the sea, they cross the desert, and they arrive at a mountain called Sinai. And the mountain is on fire. The book of Exodus describes smoke, thunder, a sound like a trumpet growing louder and louder, the whole peak shaking. God tells the people to stay back, to not even touch the base of the mountain, and then Moses, alone, walks up into the cloud and disappears for 40 days and 40 nights. Up there, God gives him a staggering amount. The 10 Commandments, yes, but also chapter after chapter of law and the full blueprint for the tabernacle, the portable temple they're going to build. It goes on and on. And then, at the very end of all that instruction, the text says something that should stop you cold. It says God gave Moses 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone, written with the finger of God. Sit with that phrase for a second, because it's stranger than it sounds. The finger of God. In the whole rest of the Bible, God speaks. He thunders, he whispers, he sends words through prophets and dreams and angels. But he does not pick up a pen. This is the one place, the single object in all of Scripture, where the text says God himself did the writing. Every other word of the Bible reaches you through a human hand holding a reed. These 2 stones did not. They came down already written by something no human hand touched. And think about how much weight the text puts on these 2 slabs. The size of the stones was never the point. The source was. Every commandment, every prophecy, every promise anywhere else in Scripture reaches you filtered through a human being who heard it and wrote it down. These stones skipped the middleman. Whatever was cut into them came straight from the one who made the mountain they sat on. And the text is oddly specific about what these stones looked like, which is where it gets even more curious. When Moses finally comes down carrying them, Exodus says the tablets were written on both sides, on the one side and on the other, front and back. And it says the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets, written on both sides. The ancient rabbis stared at that detail for centuries and could not let it go. Because if letters are cut all the way through stone, front to back, then certain letters should physically fall out. Think of a letter with a closed loop in the middle, like an O. Cut that shape clean through a slab, and the center drops out. So the old teachers said the writing on these tablets was a standing miracle. The letters went straight through the stone, readable from both the front and the back, and the floating centers of those closed letters simply hung in the air where they should have fallen out. Hold that picture for a second. The stone that refuses to behave like stone, because you are going to need it very soon. Everything the text says about these tablets is building one single impression, that this is an object which could never simply be replaced. Keep that in the back of your mind. In a few minutes, it becomes the whole problem. Now, that's a tradition, a way the rabbis read a strange verse, and I'll flag it as exactly that rather than as plain history. But notice what even the tradition is reaching for. It's trying to describe an object that does not behave like ordinary stone, and there's more of that. Another old tradition says the tablets weren't common rock at all, but sapphire, a deep blue stone, the same blue the book of Exodus uses when it describes the pavement under God's feet, looking like sapphire. Heavy, blue, glowing, written straight through. Whatever the literal material, the text and the traditions around it agree on one thing. This was the most valuable object on earth. And that's the whole reason the next part is so hard to understand. Because Moses is going to take this object, the one thing God wrote with his own finger, the most valuable object that has ever existed, and he is going to throw it on the ground and break it into pieces on purpose. We treat that as the act of a man who lost his temper, but hold on to the value of what he's holding, because once you understand what these stones were, the smashing stops looking like a loss of control and starts looking like the most deliberate thing he ever did. You do not accidentally shatter the finger of God. There has to be a reason strong enough to justify destroying the single holiest thing in the world. And there was. Because while God was carving these tablets at the top of the mountain, something was happening at the bottom. Moses had been gone 40 days. And 40 days, it turns out, was long enough for the people who had just watched a sea split open to decide their rescuer was never coming back. Long enough to build a replacement God out of their own jewelry, and long enough to turn the greatest moment in their history into the worst betrayal in it. To understand why Moses broke the most precious thing on earth, you have to understand what those tablets actually were to God. And they were not a rule book. They were closer to a wedding certificate. Let's go down the mountain. Here is what the tablets meant, and it changes how the whole scene lands. In the way the ancient Jewish teachers read it, what happened at Mount Sinai was not a lecture. It was a wedding. God is the groom. Israel is the bride. The mountain is the wedding canopy held up over both of them. The 40 days Moses spends up top are the drawing up of the marriage document, and the tablets, the two stones written by the finger of God, are the contract of that marriage. The Hebrew world had a word for the written agreement a groom gives his bride. The rabbis reached for exactly that image here. The tablets were the vows, carved in stone, between God and the people he had just married. And once you see it that way, look at how the commandments actually open. The very first words are not a rule about stealing or murder. They're a declaration of relationship. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. That's not legislation. That's a vow of faithfulness. It's a groom saying, I am yours, and you are mine, and there will be no one else. The first and greatest command carved into that stone is, at its heart, about fidelity. And the second command flows straight out of the first. Make no carved image and do not bow to it. In a marriage, that is the promise not to give yourself to anyone else. The opening of the 10 Commandments is not a list of unrelated rules at all. It is a groom and a bride promising to belong to each other and no one else, pressed into stone that will outlast them both. Now hold that vow in your mind, that promise of no other gods, and go back down to the bottom of the mountain, where the ink on the marriage contract is not even dry yet. because while God is up top carving "I am yours" into sapphire, the bride is at the foot of the mountain doing the one thing the contract forbids. The people go to Aaron, Moses' own brother, and they say, "This Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. Make us a god who will go before us." And Aaron collects their gold, melts it down, and out of it he shapes a calf. And the people bow to it and say, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Feel the timing of that. This is not a betrayal that happens years into a marriage when things have gone cold. This is adultery on the wedding day. Before the papers are even delivered, the bride has taken another. They take the exact words of the first vow, "the God who brought you out of Egypt," and they paste them onto a statue they made themselves that morning. It is the most brutal possible timing for a betrayal, and the text knows it. So now Moses comes down. God has already told him what's happening, and Moses has already talked God out of destroying the people on the spot. But knowing about it and seeing it are two different things. He comes around the mountain, the tablets in his arms, and he sees it with his own eyes. The calf, the dancing, his people, days after the greatest miracle in their history, worshipping a lump of gold. And the text says, "His anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain." And here is where almost everyone reads it wrong. We picture a man so furious he loses control and smashes something priceless. But the ancient readers saw something far more deliberate, and once they point it out, you can't unsee it. Think about what a marriage contract is for. It's proof of the vows, and if a bride has been unfaithful, that same contract becomes the evidence that convicts her. As long as the document exists and is signed, it can be held against her in full. So in this reading, Moses does not break the tablets in spite of loving the people. He breaks them because he loves the people. He destroys the marriage contract before it can be used as proof of their betrayal. An agreement that was never fully delivered cannot be violated in full. By shattering the stone, he may have shielded them from the complete weight of what they'd just done. It's the act of a defense attorney who grabs the signed confession off the table and rips it up before the judge can read it. And watch what he does next, because it tells you where his rage was actually aimed, and it was not at the stone. He takes the golden calf, the thing they made, and he burns it in the fire. Then he grinds it down to powder, scatters the powder on water, and makes the people drink it. He forces the idol back into the bodies of the ones who bowed to it. That is not a man who has lost control of himself. That is a man doing something exact and terrible on purpose. Which is the whole reason the way he handled the tablets, one beat earlier, deserves a second look. His hands knew the difference between the calf and the covenant. And the wild thing is that the text seems to agree with this reading, because much later, when God tells Moses to make the second set, there's a phrase in the Hebrew that the rabbis noticed can be read as God endorsing the breaking. As if God says, "The first tablets, the ones that you broke." And the old teachers heard in that a kind of approval, and they put words in God's mouth that became famous. "Well done for breaking them. You did the right thing when you shattered them." Which is an astonishing thing to say about the destruction of the holiest object on earth. It means the smashing was not the prophet failing. It may have been the prophet passing the hardest test of the whole story, choosing his broken people over the perfect stone. But approval or not, the fact remains. The marriage contract is in pieces on the ground. The finger of God is shattered. And that opens the question this entire video turns on. What happens to a covenant after it's been broken? Can you ever get the first thing back exactly as it was? Because when Moses goes back up the mountain to try, God gives him an instruction that is stranger than the smashing ever was. God tells him to bring something with him. And what God asks him to bring changes the meaning of everything. Here is the instruction, and the difference in it is the key to the whole thing. God says to Moses, "Cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Cut for yourself." Read that against how the first set was made, and the shift is enormous. The first tablets, the text was careful to tell you, were the work of God. God cut the stone. God wrote the words. Start to finish, the whole thing was His, and the people simply received it. It was pure gift. Nobody worked for it. Nobody earned it. It descended from the mountain finished, like everything else in that first honeymoon of grace. But the second time, God does not hand down finished stone. He says, you cut it. You go find the rock. You do the quarrying, the shaping, the heavy, sweating physical labor of preparing 2 blank slabs and carry them up the mountain, and then I will write. The writing, the actual words, stays God's work. But the stone is now on Moses, and that single change carries the entire meaning of the second chance. Because think about what it's saying. The first covenant, the one before the failure, was all grace and no labor. It was given. The second covenant, the one that comes after the betrayal, is grace plus labor. The words are still a gift from God. They always are. No human being writes those. But now the people have to participate in their own restoration. They have to do the hard, unglamorous work of preparing the surface that grace gets written on. After you fail, God does not stop giving, but He does start asking you to show up and quarry the stone. And there's something that happens in the gap between the 2 sets that makes the second stone even more remarkable. Before Moses ever picks up the chisel, he goes back up the mountain to fight for these people, and he does it with words that should stagger you. He tells God, "If you will not forgive them, then blot me out of the book you have written. Erase my name instead of theirs." The prophet offers his own place in the whole story in exchange for a guilty people who have just betrayed him. And in answer, at the very moment the second tablets are being prepared, God does something He does almost nowhere else. He passes in front of Moses and says out loud who He is: compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, overflowing with loyal love, forgiving wrongdoing and rebellion and sin. That self-description, spoken right there beside the second stones, becomes one of the most repeated lines about God in the entire Bible, echoed by prophet after prophet for the next 1,000 years. So the second tablets are not only carved out of failure, they are carved in the exact place and the exact moment where God defined Himself as the one who forgives. And this is where the ancient teachers say something that sounds impossible at first. They say the second tablets, the ones born out of failure and human effort, were in certain ways greater than the first, greater than the ones written entirely by God. How could a set that a broken, guilty people had to work for be greater than the flawless original? Their answer is beautiful, and it's the emotional center of this whole story. They taught that because the second tablets came through repentance, through a people who had fallen and gotten back up, they came with more. The first tablets in this reading were just the bare commandments, but the second set arrived carrying the fuller tradition with it, the explanations, the deeper teaching, the whole living body of interpretation that grows up around the law. The perfect gift you never worked for stays on the surface. The gift you receive after failing, after grieving what you broke, that one puts down roots. The people who had never failed would have gotten the commandments. The people who failed and returned got the commandments and everything underneath them, and the timing of it seals the whole idea. Track the days. Moses is on the mountain 40 days for the first tablets. He comes down, breaks them, and then there's a long, agonizing stretch where he goes back up to plead for the people, to beg God not to abandon them. And then a final 40 days on the mountain to receive the second set. And when you add up that calendar the way tradition does, the day Moses finally comes back down carrying the second tablets, the day the relationship is repaired and the people are forgiven, lands on a specific date on the Hebrew calendar, the 10th day of the month of Tishrei. And if you know the Jewish calendar, you just felt the floor shift, because the 10th of Tishrei is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the year, the day of forgiveness, the day the entire nation fasts and returns to God and is made clean. In this tradition, that day is not an arbitrary date God picked. It is the anniversary of the second tablets. The Day of Atonement exists because it is the day the broken covenant was mended, the day the second stones came down the mountain and the marriage was saved. Forgiveness got a date on the calendar, and the date is the day of the second chance. And that, right there, is the reason this channel exists. To take a scene you thought was just a man losing his temper, and show you it's actually the origin of the holiest day of forgiveness in the world. If that's the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe, because every week we go back into the text and pull out what the quick retellings leave on the floor. Now, back to the mountain, because the second tablets are about to hand us the strangest puzzle in the entire story, because we've been assuming this whole time that the second tablet said the same thing as the first. God even says so in that instruction, "I will write the words that were on the first tablets." Same words. Case closed. Except that when you actually read what happens next, in the very same chapter, the text lists a set of commandments that do not match the 10 you're picturing at all. And it calls those the 10. Let me show you. Here is the puzzle. And once you see it, you will never read this chapter the same way again. When most people picture the 10 Commandments, they picture the famous list: no other gods, no idols, don't take God's name in vain, keep the Sabbath, honor your father and mother, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. That list lives in Exodus chapter 20, and it's the one carved over courthouse doors. That's the ethical 10, the moral code everyone means when they say the 10 Commandments. But the second tablets aren't made in chapter 20. They're made in chapter 34, after the golden calf, and chapter 34 has its own list of commands right before it announces the 10. So read what's actually there. In the verses leading up to the second tablets, God gives Moses these instructions. Make no covenant with the people of the land you're entering. Tear down their altars. Make yourself no molten gods. Keep the feast of unleavened bread. Every firstborn belongs to me. Work 6 days and rest on the 7th. Keep the feast of weeks and the feast of ingathering. Do not offer the blood of a sacrifice with anything leavened. Bring the best of your first fruits to the house of God. And then, the strangest one to modern ears, do not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Now look at that list again. It's almost entirely about worship and festivals and ritual. Which altars to tear down, which feasts to keep, what not to do with a young goat. There's nothing in it about murder or stealing or lying or honoring your parents. It is a different kind of law entirely. And then, right after this list, comes the line that makes it a genuine mystery. God says to Moses, "Write these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel." And the very next verse says, "He wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 words, the 10 commandments." Feel the problem. The text just gave us a list about festivals and first fruits and a young goat, and then it turns around and calls that list the 10 Commandments, and says, those are the words that went on the tablets. Read plainly in order. Chapter 34 seems to be telling you that the second tablets, the ones Moses carved by hand, were inscribed not with the famous moral 10, but with this other set of ritual laws. This is not some fringe observation. Scholars have a name for that second list. They call it the ritual decalogue, decalogue just meaning the 10 words, as opposed to the ethical decalogue of chapter 20. And the person who first pointed at this problem in a serious way was not a skeptic trying to tear down the Bible. It was the poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, back in 1773, who read chapter 34 closely and asked the obvious question nobody wanted to ask. If this chapter is where the tablets get remade, and this chapter has its own 10 and calls them the tablet words, then maybe this ritual list is what the tablets originally held. A century later, biblical scholars built that observation into some of the biggest theories about how the first books of the Bible were assembled from different sources. Now, I have to be honest with you here, because honesty is the whole point of this channel, and it would be easy to overclaim in either direction. There are two serious ways to read this, and I'm going to give you both fairly. And which one you land on changes what was literally cut into the holiest object the nation ever owned. So it's worth slowing down for exactly 1 minute. The traditional reading holds it all together like this. When chapter 34 says God will write the words that were on the first tablets, it means exactly that, the famous moral 10 from chapter 20. In this view, the ritual list earlier in chapter 34 is a separate speech, the terms of the renewed relationship, God reminding a people who just worshipped a golden calf to tear down idols and keep his feasts. It's the covenant conversation. And then, separately, the same original 10 get carved onto the new stone. On this reading, the tablets always said the same thing, both times, the moral code you know. That reading is clean, and for most of history, it was the only one on the table. But there is a second way to read the exact same chapter, and it does not sit anywhere near as quietly. The critical reading takes the chapter at plain face value. It says the words closest to the sentence about the tablets are that ritual list, and the text calls those the 10, so that list is very likely a genuinely old, alternate tradition of what the tablets held, later smoothed together with the more famous version. Two ancient memories of the same stones, preserved side by side in the same book. I'm not going to tell you which is correct because serious, faithful, careful people land on both sides, and pretending it's settled would be lying to you. But here's what neither side can escape, and it's the thing worth carrying out of this section. The Bible itself, read slowly and in order, makes you stop and work to be sure what was carved on the second stone. The book that everyone treats as obvious about the 10 Commandments is quietly holding two different lists near the same tablets. Most people have gone their whole lives certain they know what's on those stones and have never once read the chapter where the stones are actually made. And it goes further than which list, because even the count itself, the number 10, is not as fixed as you would think. The Bible says there are 10, but it never numbers them 1 through 10 for you. It just gives you the words and calls them the 10. So different faith traditions, reading the exact same text, split it up differently to arrive at 10. In the Jewish numbering, the opening line, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt," is itself the first of the 10, a statement rather than a command. Catholics and Lutherans fold the ban on other gods and the ban on idols together into one commandment and then split the final one, the ban on coveting, into 2 to keep the total at 10. Many Protestant and Eastern Orthodox churches instead keep idols as their own separate second commandment. Same stone, same words, 3 different ways of counting to 10. There are people reading the identical commandments who number them differently than their neighbors and have no idea they're doing it. And the uncertainty goes even deeper than which list, because there's a second question hiding in that same verse. Who did the writing on the second set? God said in verse 1, "I will write." But when you reach the verse where the writing actually happens, the Hebrew just says he wrote, and it's genuinely unclear who he is. Moses had just been told, a line earlier, "Write these words." So some ancient readers concluded that on the second set, unlike the first, it was Moses who did the carving of the words, not God. The mainstream reading still holds that God wrote both times and Moses only cut the stone, but even that isn't as airtight as the Sunday school version pretends. On the holiest object of the second chance, the text leaves a little uncertainty about whose hand held the chisel. So we've got two sets of stone, possibly two different lists of words, and now a question mark over whose hand did the writing. One set shattered, one set whole, which leaves the last question, the one people almost never ask. What happened to them? Where did the tablets go? Because the answer is that the broken pieces and the whole second set ended up in the exact same place, together, in one box. And then that box vanished from history and has never been found. After the second tablets come down, God has the people build a container for them, a wooden chest overlaid in gold with two golden angels facing each other on the lid, the Ark of the Covenant, and its entire purpose, its one job, is to hold the tablets. The text says plainly that Moses took the testimony, the second tablets, and placed them inside the Ark. That's what the Ark is, a box built to carry the words. But here is the detail that almost nobody is ever told, and it might be the most moving thing in the entire story. The ancient rabbis asked a simple question. When Moses put the whole second tablets into the Ark, what happened to the broken pieces of the first set? The shards from the smashing at the foot of the mountain. Did he sweep them up and throw them away? Bury them, leave them in the sand? And the tradition's answer is this. He gathered them up, and he placed the broken fragments of the first tablets inside the Ark, right next to the whole second set. The Talmud puts it in a single, unforgettable line. The tablets and the broken pieces of the tablets both rest in the Ark, the failure and the recovery carried together in the holiest object the nation owned. For the entire history of Israel, whenever the Ark went before them into battle, whenever it sat in the Holy of Holies, the perfect second tablets were in there, and so were the shattered remains of the first ones, side by side. The success and the scars in the same gold box. Sit with what that means, because it reaches straight out of the ancient world and puts its hand on your shoulder. The thing they broke was not thrown away. It was not hidden in shame or buried out of sight. It was carried with honor in the most sacred space they had, right beside the thing that replaced it. The broken tablets were not garbage. They were holy. In this tradition, the fragments of your worst failure are not disqualified from the holiest place. They ride in the Ark next to everything you rebuilt. And there's one last mystery, the one that closes the book on the tablets for good. Because the Ark, with both sets of tablets inside it, eventually disappears. When the Babylonians destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, around 586 years before Christ, they carried off the treasures and listed them. But the Ark is not on the list. It's simply gone from the record. When the temple was later rebuilt, the holiest room, the Holy of Holies, the place the Ark was meant to sit, was empty. Nothing but a bare stone floor. Think about what that empty room meant. For centuries, the entire system pointed inward toward the box that held the words God wrote and the words Moses recarved. It was the center of the center, the reason the whole temple existed. And when the curtain was finally drawn back in the rebuilt temple, the most sacred space on earth held nothing at all, just bare rock where the stones used to be. The tablets that started everything were simply gone, and an entire people had to learn how to carry the covenant without the stone it was written on. Where did it go? One ancient account says the prophet Jeremiah, seeing the disaster coming, took the ark and hid it in a cave on the very mountain where Moses first climbed to receive the tablets, and sealed the entrance so it could not be found until God gathered his people again. Others say it was destroyed, or captured and melted, or hidden somewhere still waiting. Nobody knows. And so the two tablets, the whole ones and the broken ones, the finger of God and the fragments of the wedding contract, slip out of history together, inside a golden box that the world has been hunting for ever since. So the tablets are gone, but the questions we started with finally have their answers. And when you lay them all out, the smashing at the beginning stops being a tantrum and becomes the most important thing Moses ever did. Let's bring it home. We started with a man breaking the most valuable object in the world, and we called it a temper tantrum. Now look at it again with everything we found. What was written on the tablets? The words God spoke as vows to a people he had just married, the moral code most of us know from chapter 20. Although, if you read the chapter where the second set is actually carved, the Bible itself quietly holds a second stranger list right next to them and leaves you to wrestle with which one went on the stone. Why did Moses break them? Not from blind rage, but very possibly to protect a guilty people from the evidence of their own betrayal, an act the text seems to bless rather than condemn. And why carve them twice in two different ways? Because the first covenant was pure gift, and the second, the one that comes after failure, is a gift you have to help carry. God writes the words, but this time you cut the stone. And then the detail I can't stop thinking about. When it was all over, they didn't throw the broken pieces away. They laid the fragments of their worst day in the holiest box they had, right beside the whole ones, and carried both for the rest of their history. Which is maybe the oldest and kindest truth in the whole story. The thing you broke does not disqualify you. It gets carried with honor right next to the thing you rebuilt. Your fragments belong in the ark too. That's the whole reason this channel exists. To open the book back up and read what's actually on the page, especially the quiet, skipped-over places where the truth turns out to be closer to your own life than anyone told you. If this changed how you see even one story, subscribe, because we just followed the tablets into a golden box that then vanished from history. And the hunt for that box, the Ark of the Covenant, where it went when Jerusalem fell, and the strange trail of clues people have chased for centuries, is a mystery all its own. That video is on screen right now. I think you'll want to know how this one ends too.